She's been cleaning the same bank for 30 years, but no one knows what she carries in her heart, or what she writes each night, alone, in a faded blue notebook. She slips quietly through marble hallways, smiling softly while everyone else is too busy to notice. She prays for people who don't even remember to say good morning, and she keeps going. No demands, no spotlight, but everything changes when that notebook goes missing and ends up in the wrong hands. Or maybe exactly where it needed to be. He's new in town, young, successful, impatient, a man made of numbers, goals, and cold decisions. On his first day, he decides to fire the entire cleaning staff, including her. He doesn't even bother to learn her name. But that night, something unsettles him. A handwritten phrase, a prayer that wasn't meant for him, and for some reason he can't explain, it makes him stop and hear a silence he's been avoiding for years. This isn't a story about visible miracles. It's about what hides between the pages no one reads. About the strength of a woman who lost everything, but never lost her faith. About the kind of prayer that seeks no applause yet leaves invisible marks on those who pass her by. And about what happens when someone who always looked down is finally forced to look up, not out of duty, but out of need. And when he does, he sees something he never expected. You're about to meet an ordinary woman, but not just any woman, and a man at the top, but completely lost. There are no shouting matches between them, no dramatic confrontations, just the power of a forgotten note, and a question that's never asked, but changes everything. Why did this move me so deeply? The answer will come. And when it does, it won't be logic. It will be memory. It will be soul. So watch closely. Because every silence in this story screams on behalf of those who've been ignored. Because not every hero wears a suit. And not every answer comes from the top. Sometimes salvation enters through the service door, pushing a cleaning cart.
Before diving into this exciting story, we want to make sure you don't miss out on any of our incredible content. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, now is the perfect time to do so. By subscribing, you'll become a valued member of our growing community, where we share amazing stories, insightful lessons, and much more. Don't wait any longer. Hit that subscribe button now and join us on this amazing journey.
The white marble floors reflected the cold light of the empty corridors. It was the middle of the night at First Liberty Bank, and the silence was broken only by the squeak of wheels from a cleaning cart gliding slowly along. Miss Clarice Monroe moved through the building like she belonged to it, unseen, present, essential. Every movement was a ritual, the cloth folded with precision, the spray released just enough, her eyes scanning for details no one would notice come morning. As she cleaned, she softly hummed an old Baptist hymn, barely a whisper, like a conversation with the floor itself. She wore a floral scarf tied firmly over her graying hair and worn-out sneakers that barely muffled the sound of her gentle steps. She passed the boardroom where leather chairs slept in silence. She dusted the gold frames with the same care one might use cleaning an altar. Later, in the back break room, she warmed up some coffee in a foam cup, sat down for a moment, and opened her faded blue notebook. Between its yellowed pages, she wrote yet another prayer. May the weary soul find refuge, even where pride sits, on the throne. At the top corner of the page, she drew a small cross, and beneath it, wrote in steady handwriting, "For anyone who needs light today." It was as if each phrase carried a seed of comfort. Clarice closed her eyes for a moment and prayed in silence. A silence that asked for no answers, only presence. She wasn't praying for herself. She was praying for everyone who walked into that bank believing wealth made them untouchable. The routine never changed. Clean, pray, hum quietly, and disappear before sunrise. On her way out, Clarice would run her fingers over the wooden cross, hanging from her neck, take a deep breath, and head to the bus stop. No one knew her full name. Few noticed that she took the janitor's uniforms home to wash when they were too dirty. But to Clarice, Being invisible wasn't what hurt. The pain came from knowing no one seemed to listen anymore. That night, before she left, she placed a small note on the trash can in the boardroom. God honors the small gestures, even the ones no one sees. And then she went on her way. The city was still asleep. The tall buildings around her had no idea that a woman had just walked among them carrying scars with grace, loss with faith, and silence with purpose. Miss Clarice Monroe wasn't looking for recognition. She just wanted to leave the world a little cleaner, inside and out. The next morning, the employees arrived as usual. But that day, a new man stood watching everything from the glass balcony on the second floor. Ethan Reeves, freshly transferred from New York, wore a flawless suit and a hard expression. He saw no beauty in invisible gestures, only numbers, only performance, only profit. And with a slight shake of his head, he murmured to himself, "This place is going to change fast." It was only 8:02 a.m. when Ethan Reeves walked into the First Liberty Bank's conference room. His tie was tight, hair perfectly combed, tablet in hand, and his stare sliced through the air like a razor. Employees straightened up in their chairs. At the sight of him, some masked their tension, others barely breathed. Ethan didn't smile, didn't greet anyone. He simply projected a chart onto the screen and said in a flat voice, "In the next 30 days, I want this bank operating with 20% less human cost." A wave of discomfort swept through the room. Without sugarcoating it, he continued, "We're replacing the cleaning staff with a contracted service, trained professionals, discreet, efficient, nothing personal, just progress." Eyes met across the table, tense, but no one dared to respond. Clarice, who had quietly stepped in to clean the coffee area, overheard everything from the hallway. Her hands trembled for a second, but she simply lowered her gaze, squeezed the wet cloth, and kept wiping in silence. Ethan remained unmoved. Every department will be reevaluated. Real meritocracy. If you don't stand out, you'll be replaced. The days of good mornings and homemade cake in the break room are over. An older employee tried to speak up, saying some of them had been there for decades. Ethan cut him off without raising his voice. And maybe that's exactly the problem. They've been here too long. He didn't shout. But there was something in his coldness that hurt more than any insult. It was as if no one had a face anymore, just name tags. Back in the break room, Clarice folded the cloth, took a deep breath, and silently recited a Bible verse she'd memorized years ago. Then she sat down for a moment and wrote another one on the note she'd take home. Better, the humble with little than the arrogant in a hurry. She knew change was coming. She'd seen it before, managers who came and went like storms. But something about that man stirred an old pain buried deep inside her. At the end of the meeting, Ethan walked through the hallway and saw Clarice crouched down, polishing the baseboards with a folded rag. He didn't say a word, just looked at her like one might inspect an old piece of furniture. She glanced up briefly and smiled with the grace of someone who knows kindness is not the same as submission. But Ethan simply turned away and kept walking. Clarice stayed there, her hands still damp, sensing that something, invisible but profound, had cracked in the air. Later that day, while reviewing contracts in his office, Ethan typed quickly. But something was bothering him. A small piece of paper had been left on his desk. He had no idea who put it there. On it, a single sentence. "Every great decision begins inside a clean heart." He frowned, crumpled the note, and tossed it away. But before the paper hit the trash can, his eyes met the reflection of Clarice in the glass, out in the hallway, cleaning with the same quiet calm as always. The morning was muggy when Ethan walked into his office with a folder under his arm and a furrowed brow. Everything appeared to be in order. Desk spotless, air conditioning running, coffee served. But as he placed the cup on the polished wood surface, he noticed a faint circular mark, almost invisible. He stopped, ran his finger over it, then picked up the phone. "I want the person in charge of cleaning in here now." His voice was calm but loaded with command. Minutes later, Clarice entered silently, eyes downcast, her hands still carrying the scent of disinfectant. Ethan didn't wait for explanations. He pointed at the mark with contained irritation. "Is this what you call a job well done?" Clarice tried to explain she hadn't cleaned that room that morning. Another employee handled that floor on Wednesdays. But Ethan cut her off. "Doesn't matter. If this team were efficient, things like this wouldn't happen." The silence in the room was louder than any shouting could have been. Outside, 2 employees watched through the glass divider. One of them, a young man in a navy blue suit, swallowed hard. He was the one who had cleaned the office that morning, but fear kept him silent. Clarice, though blameless, bowed her head. "I'm sorry, sir. It won't happen again." Ethan waved her off with a flick of the hand, as if wiping his own irritation from the air. She walked out slowly, holding the cleaning rag like it was a piece of her own pride. In the hallway, Clarice took a deep breath, stopped beside her cleaning cart, and closed her eyes for a moment. Then she picked up where she'd left off. Her eyes still glistened with tears, but the corners of her lips lifted with a familiar old melody. She started to sing again, the same gentle hymn she hummed every morning. Most people walking by didn't notice the sadness in her voice, but the song came out, and it came out strong, as if cleaning was also her way of standing tall. As she collected papers from the printer, Clarice saw the young man in the navy blue suit walk by. He looked at her with guilt in his eyes, but kept going, said nothing, just quickened his pace. Clarice didn't blame him. She was used to silence, had lived through many. But what hurt the most was knowing that in a bank filled with gold and glass, truth was worth less than hierarchy. At the end of her shift, when everyone had already gone home, she returned to the boardroom. She looked up, clutched the small wooden cross around her neck, and wiped down the same table where that morning she had been humiliated. The door shut with a sharp snap. Ethan dropped his briefcase on the marble kitchen counter and let out a heavy sigh. The soft yellow light from the pendant lamp revealed a house that was big, modern, flawless, and empty. His wife was sitting on the couch with her laptop in her lap, eyes never lifting. She simply said, "Dinner's in the microwave." No affection, no sarcasm, just a statement. Ethan glanced at the untouched table setting, then walked down the hall without saying a word. At his oldest son's bedroom door, he heard loud music and muffled chatter from an online game. He knocked lightly. "Can I come in?" No reply. He slowly pushed the door open, only to be met with an eye roll and a gesture to leave. "I got suspended today, but you probably already saw the email." Ethan frowned. "Why?" The boy shrugged. "I spoke to the principal the same way you do." Ethan froze. He closed the door slowly and made his way to the master bedroom. There, he sat on the edge of the bed, the buttons of his shirt half undone, his cuffs still tight from the stress of the day. On the nightstand, a photo frame coated with a light layer of dust. Inside, an old picture. Ethan as a child holding a piece of bread with a shy smile. In the background, an alleyway, a memory he had sworn to bury. But lately, those images kept coming back, especially when he saw humble faces like Clarice's. He hated that, hated remembering. With a glass of whiskey in hand, he stepped out onto the back porch, sat alone, staring into the darkness of the yard. The breeze was warm, but his chest felt cold. Something was off, and it wasn't the house or the bank. It was him. But admitting that would mean unlocking a door he'd kept sealed for years. So, he chose silence. And another sip. Meanwhile, his wife walked past and up the stairs without even glancing in his direction. Later that night, Ethan sat at the desk in his home office, the one he used on Sundays. But he couldn't bring himself to open the laptop. He picked up a blank sheet of paper and tried to write something, a sentence, a goal, anything. But his fingers wouldn't cooperate. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out an old paper, yellowed, almost torn, with a phone number scribbled by hand. The last time he'd tried to call, he couldn't bring himself to press dial. The next morning, he arrived at the bank, earlier than usual. The hallways were still empty. He walked slowly, silently toward the break room. There, on the small wooden table, something was out of place. A worn, forgotten object. A blue notebook. Left behind almost as if on purpose. He reached out with hesitation, and when he opened to the first page, he read, "For anyone who needs light today." The same line he'd once heard, without fully grasping it, in Clarice's voice just days before. The blue notebook was old, but it had weathered time as if it knew how important it was. Ethan opened it with the curiosity of someone stumbling upon something off script. The handwriting was steady, simple, and each page looked like it had been written with almost ceremonial care. In the margin of one, he read, Proverbs 3:5, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." He frowned, turned another page. "Today I pray for those who err while trying to do right. May they be seen from within, not just for what they produce." The pages multiplied like whispered prayers in the dark, prayers for those who feel fear and hide it, for boys who cry from hunger and silence, or for hearts hardened by the rush of life. Ethan read quietly, as if invading something far too intimate. There was no full name, just the initials CM, always next to a small cross drawn with a firm hand. Further into the notebook, one name caught his attention, Hope. He read it again. The prayer said, "Lord, protect Hope where no eyes can reach. Even if the world forgets her, may your memory be greater than the pain." Ethan closed the notebook for a moment. The name hit him like an old sound, an echo from a time he thought long buried. But he didn't recognize the connection. Not yet. He just felt it, and it was the kind of feeling he wasn't used to allowing. He stood up and on impulse tucked the notebook into the drawer of his desk. Hours later, Clarice arrived at the bank as usual. She greeted the security guards with a nod and headed to the break room. As she opened her bag, she noticed the emptiness. The notebook was gone. She searched calmly at first, then with urgency. She checked the supply closet, the women's restroom, then returned to the break room. When it still didn't turn up, she sat slowly in one of the chairs and went quiet, eyes fixed on the floor. Her breathing trembled. Upstairs, Ethan stood behind the glass balcony. He watched her movements, her anxious glances, the constant searching. But he said nothing. He simply held the notebook as if it had become more than just words on paper. That night at home, he opened it again to the same page. A new prayer seemed to leap off the page. "May bread reach the forgotten child. May the right hand extend when the world turns away." Ethan stopped. His hands trembled. And for a second, everything inside him fell silent. That night, he didn't drink. He just sat on the porch staring up at the dark sky. The memory was distant but vivid. A skinny, dirty boy sitting on a sidewalk. A woman with a colorful scarf handed him a piece of bread and said something about hope. He couldn't remember her face, just her voice, and the taste of warm bread. And now the name Hope returned like a whisper from a past he had never dared to face. That morning, something new appeared on the supply room's bulletin board. A simple, handwritten note, the letters carefully formed. "If anyone finds a blue notebook with a worn cover and handwritten pages, please leave it in the janitor's room. It holds sentimental value." Clarice pinned it up gently as if she were attaching hope to a world that moved too fast. Beside the note, she discreetly drew a small cross, a sign from someone who still believes, even without guarantees. In the break room, she left another note on the table where she always placed her coffee, then one more, by the service elevator. She didn't accuse, didn't complain. She simply asked, with gentleness. Anyone who read it could recognize her handwriting, and those who saw her face in the hallways that day knew something had been lost. But Ethan, as he walked past, one of the notes simply lowered his eyes and kept going, pretended not to know, hid the notebook as if he still needed to understand why he couldn't bring himself to return it. That afternoon, between spreadsheets and memos, he opened the notebook again. This time, he flipped all the way to the end. On one of the faded pages, there was an older entry. The handwriting was different, shakier, younger, but the words struck him like thunder. "Today, Lord, I pray for a boy I found crying on the street. I gave what I had, a piece of bread and a prayer. I leave the rest in your hands." Ethan felt the breath catch in his chest. It had to be a coincidence. It had to be. He shoved the notebook back into the drawer. But the sentence wouldn't leave his mind. That night he lay in bed wide awake, tossed and turned, dreamed of an empty bench and alley, and a woman with a floral scarf fading into the mist. When he woke, he sat up and stared into the mirror. That rigid face, carefully trained for years to seem unshakable, was now starting to crack at the edges. And he knew. This wasn't just about the notebook. It was about him, about what he had become. Meanwhile, Clarice arrived home in silence. She took off her shoes, hung up her scarf, and turned on the small lamp in the living room. She sat before a modest bookshelf and pulled down an old picture frame. A photo of her daughter, soft smile, eyes full of light. Next to it, a folded piece of paper with a Bible verse handwritten by her daughter before she passed. Wisdom cries out in the streets, but few stop to listen. Clarice pressed the note to her chest and prayed, not for the notebook to return, but for it to fulfill its purpose wherever it had gone. The next day, more notes appeared, all discreet, all ignored, except by one man. Ethan read each one as if they were messages left just for him, and still, he didn't move. The notebook remained there, tucked away, alive, pulsing. He didn't know why, but he could feel there was more in it than just faith. There was a past begging to be heard, and a heart, his own, trying to remember how to listen. It was 6:17 p.m. when Clarice finished cleaning the top floor. The bank had already emptied out, and the halls were swallowed by that familiar silence she knew so well. She put away her supplies slowly, almost as if delaying her departure. Something inside her whispered that tonight would be different. Before leaving, she looked once more at the notes on the bulletin boards, all untouched, all ignored, but she still believed, and that was enough. That's when she heard firm footsteps behind her. Ethan, alone, no briefcase, no tablet, just the blue notebook in his hands. He stopped a few steps away, eyes downcast, as if he were carrying more than just paper. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. Clarice nodded with a gentle smile as if she already knew. Ethan held out the notebook. She took it with both hands, with the same tenderness of a mother receiving a child back home. But before she could thank him, he asked, "This prayer about the boy on the street, when did you write it?" Clarice looked upward for a moment, trying to draw time from memory. More than 30 years ago, maybe 32. He was around 7, hungry, sitting on the sidewalk near an old abandoned market. I had only a piece of bread and a little bottle of water. I gave him what I had, and afterward, I prayed for him. I never saw him again. Her voice was calm, but in her eyes was something else, a mix of memory and a promise fulfilled. Ethan swallowed hard, his eyes already glistening. "It was me," he whispered. Clarice didn't react with surprise. She simply closed her eyes for a moment like someone receiving confirmation from heaven. He continued, "I never forgot. Not your face, because I was too young, but your voice and the bread. I spent my whole life trying to forget that day, but it never left me." The silence between them was so deep you could hear the air conditioning humming like a second heartbeat. "And I almost had you fired," Ethan said, voice cracking. Clarice gently touched his arm, like someone offering forgiveness without needing words. "But you didn't," she replied. "And maybe it was meant to be that way." He bowed his head in shame. "I became the man I swore I'd never be. Cold, impatient, afraid to look weak." Clarice nodded. "Pain, when left unhealed, turns into armor, but it also isolates." For a few moments, they stood there, just a man and a woman, connected by a quiet memory, by a gesture the world had long forgotten, but not God. Ethan held the notebook for a moment longer. "This notebook saved me. You saved me. Twice." Clarice smiled with eyes full of tears. "It wasn't me. It was the faith that lives in the small things." And then, with a long exhale, he asked, "Can I share this story?" She didn't answer with words. She simply nodded. And in that moment, the invisible was no longer forgotten. It was a Saturday when Ethan parked his car in front of the small house on the edge of town. The street was quiet, lined with old trees and colorful clotheslines stretched across backyards. He stepped out, not in a suit, just a light blue shirt and hesitant steps. He rang the doorbell. Clarice opened the door wearing a floral scarf tied over her hair and an apron over her simple dress. She smiled softly, like someone welcoming a guest she always knew would come. "Come in, the kettle's on." And he stepped inside. The house was modest, but warm. The living room walls held framed Bible verses and old family photos. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with the scent of warm cornbread. Ethan looked around with quiet reverence. It felt like a place where time moved slower. Beside the bookshelf, he noticed a small wooden cross, just like the one he used to wear as a child. He reached out and touched it. The memory came rushing. Back like a breeze, that cross. He'd held one just like it before, Clarice noticed. "My daughter made that one when she was little. I used to hand them out on cold nights. Some I gave to children I found on the streets." Ethan nodded, eyes still on the cross. "Mine. I kept it until I was 15. Then, I lost it." He sat down at the table, his hands trembling slightly. Clarice poured the coffee with the same care she used when placing notes around the bank. "Here, everything holds memory. Every cup, every corner. Pain lives here, but so does the light." As they ate in quiet, Ethan pulled a printed page from his pocket. It was a draft for a new project. At the top, Listening and Hope Center, internal proposal. He laid it on the table. "I want to build this inside the bank, a place where people can breathe, read, speak. The bank has everything, except humanity. You reminded me of that." Clarice didn't answer. She simply held her cup with both hands and looked out the window. Outside, the sunlight filtered through the trees, softer now. Before leaving, Ethan paused in front of an old photograph. In it, Clarice stood beside a young woman with the same gentle smile. "Hope?" he asked. She nodded. "My most beautiful gift. She left early, but she still visits, in the silences." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, as if something inside him had just clicked into place. That's why the name echoed so loudly. It was the name of Hope, and the girl who had marked his life forever. As he stepped outside, Ethan turned and asked, "Why didn't you ever tell anyone about me?" Clarice answered softly, yet firmly, "Because the good we do doesn't need a stage, it needs roots." He nodded, and for the first time in a long while he hugged someone without thinking about appearances, just with gratitude. The afternoon light wrapped around them, and there, in the quiet backyard of a house forgotten by the maps, the invisible began to be remembered. The main hall of First Liberty Bank was packed that morning. Employees from every department had been called for an emergency meeting. The room buzzed. Speculations, cautious glances, whispers of layoffs and restructuring. Ethan walked in with calm steps, holding only a brown folder. No tablet, no spreadsheets. He looked different, not because of the suit, but because of his eyes. Something had softened, without losing strength. "Before any announcements, I want to tell you a story," he said, stopping at the center of the room. Eyes met, surprised. He took a deep breath. 32 years ago, I was just a hungry boy sitting on a sidewalk. I was seen by a woman who didn't ask me anything. She simply gave me a piece of bread and prayed for me. A reverent hush fell over the room. People exchanged glances. Clarice, standing quietly by the door, held her folded rag and her rapidly beating heart. This woman has worked here for 3 decades. She's seen generations of managers come and go, teams change, and she's never been promoted, never asked for anything. But she has prayed for all of us. He opened the folder and pulled out the blue notebook. And it was this notebook that brought me back. Back to memory. Back to humanity. Back to the boy I buried to survive the corporate world. The silence turned to visible emotion. Some of the older staff already had tears in their eyes. Ethan looked straight at Clarice. "Miss Monroe, I owe you my life. Not just for that day, but for all the days you kept this place clean on the outside and sacred on the inside." She simply nodded with a modest smile. "So, all dismissals have been canceled. And more. Today we are officially creating a new space in this bank. A space for rest, listening, reading, and faith. We'll call it the Hope Room. In honor of her daughter and everything she stands for." Applause broke out, strong and heartfelt. Clarice, visibly moved, placed her hand over the cross on her necklace. But she didn't speak. She simply smiled with her eyes. Ethan stepped forward and handed her an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "You didn't save me once. You saved me twice. And now, you've saved all of us." She read it slowly, pressing the paper to her chest like someone holding a miracle. And as the employees stood to embrace her, Ethan stepped back and simply watched. For the first time, he understood the value of what can't be measured in numbers. He understood the power of the invisible, the value of presence, the strength of those who stay when others forget, the faith that cleans the floor, but also the heart. And in that moment, Miss Clarice Monroe was no longer invisible. She became the quiet anchor of a bank that at last remembered what it meant to be human. The new room was inaugurated quietly. No ribbon cutting, no grand speeches. But everyone knew something sacred had been created there. The walls, painted in soft tones, featured quotes taken from the blue notebook. There were books, cozy chairs, a table filled with encouraging notes, and a shelf holding the notebook open to a special page. At the top, in simple letters, "Wisdom cries out in the streets." The same phrase Hope had written so many years before. Clarice visited the room every morning before beginning her day. Now she didn't just clean, she welcomed. Employees came to her with questions, confessions, requests for prayer. Some came in silence. Others brought tears. And she listened to them the way she had always listened to the world, with patience, with soul. The difference was, now they saw her. They called her by name. And more than that, they recognized the calling only she carried, to remind everyone of what truly matters. Ethan created a new position for her, Human Well-Being Coordinator. There was no resistance. Everyone knew the title simply made official what Clarice had already been doing for decades. She didn't change uniforms, didn't trade in her worn sneakers, but her presence now had weight. She became the visible heart of a place that had always chased goals, but was now learning to honor miracles, even the silent ones. One afternoon, a young employee said to her, "Miss Monroe, when I talk to you, it feels like the world slows down." Clarice smiled. "That's because sometimes what we lack isn't time, it's being heard." And she handed the girl a note she'd written that morning. "Let peace come in first. Everything else can wait." The young woman left in tears, and Clarice returned to her corner, softly humming an old hymn while rearranging the books on the shelf. Her faith never needed preaching. She simply lived it, between rags and coffee, between cold hallways and the room of hope. She didn't speak of miracles, but she carried them, in her voice, her gestures, her gaze. And now, without asking, without demanding, she had been placed exactly where she had always belonged, at the center of what truly sustains us, the humanity in our encounters, the kindness of ordinary days, the comfort of knowing someone is praying for us even if they don't know our name. Outside, the bank's sign still shined like always, but inside, something had changed. And in the late afternoon, as golden light poured into the new room, Clarice wrote another prayer on a blank page. "Thank you, Lord, for using even silence to transform." She wasn't seeking recognition, but now the world had paused, if only for a moment, to recognize her. Miss Clarice never asked for recognition, but she left traces wherever she went, not with words, but with presence. She didn't change the world with speeches, but with folded cloths, quiet notes, and silent prayers. And that's what saved a man who once seemed unreachable. Because sometimes all someone needs is an old gesture, rediscovered at the right moment. She never needed to assert herself, she simply remained. And because of that, she was heard. When no one else expected change, she showed that the invisible holds up the visible, and that faith, when real, doesn't perform, it dwells. Ethan wasn't transformed by a lecture, nor by guilt, but by something that pierced through him without a sound, a buried memory, reborn in the form of a prayer. The woman he nearly dismissed was the same one who had reached him decades ago, without even knowing it. And that forced him to stop, to face himself, to remember the forgotten boy still living inside him. How many times have you ignored the ones who quietly sustain your days? How many thank yous have you left unsaid? How many people around? You live with dignity while remaining invisible? This story doesn't end with a trophy. It ends with a quiet room, with an open notebook, and with a woman being called by her name, not her job title. It ends with a man in silence, finally listening again, and with all of us being reminded that character can't be bought. It's built. Miss Clarice didn't want a title. She wanted the light to keep coming in, even through the cracks. And she succeeded. Because some people the world tries to hide, but God insists on revealing. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Because sometimes, an entire life fits inside a forgotten note, and it changes everything.